If you are venturing into the world of script writing, then at some point you will have asked the question, how do I structure my script? And if you have asked that question of the internet, then at some point you will have been hit with this. 3-act structure, 5-act structure, 4 acts, 5 plot points, 40 scenes, inciting incidents, lowest point, innermost cave, all presented as lists and graphs and chapters and pyramids and wheels and cats. And at some point, if you have had this experience, you will have said, what? Just what? Well, I am here to say, forget all that, and to give you instead a very simple, straightforward tool that can be applied in just 2 easy steps. Well, not easy so much as rebellious, really, anarchic, radical even, because this works without all the dusty fuss. My name is Bede and I am a structureaholic. In my writing career, I have studied, tried and rejected every structural system out there because, well, the methods designed to help make it more comprehensible have only made it more confusing. And yet, story, like kids, needs structure because without it, like kids, things descend into chaos. So, I set out to find a fresh, gettable, crystal clear way to structure stories. And in doing so, I discovered a head-exploding fact. The idea of a beginning, a middle, and end is BS. Yeah, I said it. So where did this idea come from? Timeline montage. Ancient Greece, 330 BC. Back then they told stories in open-air amphitheatres with actors in dramatic masks that represented the character. They were accompanied by choruses who performed live voiceover in a tell-don't-show kind of way. Around this time, this dude Aristotle, the OG critic, comes up with the idea that a story has a beginning, a middle, and an end, which honestly feels like low-hanging fruit, but at the time, I guess it was like, okay. And so, though they didn't use the phrase 3-act structure, it's here the blueprint got set. Tragedies and comedies unfolded in a way that would first set the stage, then develop conflict through action, and finally wrap things up with a conclusion. And thus, the formula was born. Fast forward to Rome in Roman times, where the Romans decided the perfect story must have 5 parts. Now, no one can tell you why 5 was perfect, why they chose 5 over 4 or 6 or 7 or 8 or 15 for that matter. There are theories based on Roman oral traditions for speeches, but it's all guesses. I mean, really, as near as I can tell, the number 5 was plucked out of the air because anything less feels a little rushed and anything more will drag, maybe, I guess. Whatever the reason, it was at this point the poet Horace famously wrote that no play be either shorter or longer than 5 acts.
Hail Dondas! Hail Dondas! Hail Dondas!
No one questioned this, and so in the centuries that followed, this became gospel. Jump to Elizabethan England, where the idea of 5 parts still hung in the air like stink, even though people could no longer remember why it was so important. This is when Shakespeare and his knockarounds created bingeable plays that, after his death, were formally divided up and grouped into what they'd started calling acts, mostly for practical convenience, even though he didn't necessarily write them that way. And so this properly set act structure in stone, because Shakespeare, am I right? Enter the 20th century and Hollywood, who rejected the stage, and as such, rejected the 5-act structure. You have to understand that movies were for the people, the poor who couldn't or didn't want to go to the theatre. Motion pictures was their medium. So stories on the silver screen got closer to the kind you tell around the campfire, with pace and action and visuals. Dictated by this and physical reels of film which needed changing and required clear dramatic breaks, Hollywood screenwriters naturally streamlined their process into a 4-act structure, which is really just a 3-act structure with the 2nd act divided into 2. Still with me? Later that century, television comes in, which is episodic and even faster paced, so it needed to be even leaner. To get right to the heart of the story without an extended middle section, they naturally coalesce around a 2-act structure, particularly in US drama and comedies, while over in the UK they went even further, where 1-act TV plays that stayed in one location and moment, usually involving a kitchen sink, were massively popular.
I don't hate you. I don't even dislike you. I just don't feel anything about you. Nothing. At all.
Okay, so we've got 3, 5, 4, 2, 1 act structures to deal with, and that's even before we've started typing. And as every writer knows, that's where things get really confusing, because each word on a blank page is like a tree, and you write enough of them, pretty soon you're lost in a forest. And it's here the guru is born, the script guide who promised to help you see the forest for the trees and give you a map that will lead you from the thicket to the path. Sid Field was the first big one to do it with his book Screenplay in 1979. Adventures in the Screen Trade by William Goldman followed in 1983. Then The Writer's Journey by Christopher Vogler, which essentially built on the granddaddy of them all, Joseph Campbell's Bible of a book, The Hero with 1,000 Faces, written half a century earlier. Then came perhaps the most famous, Story by Robert McKee, a book of screenwriting do's and don'ts. More gurus and books followed into the 21st century, including Save the Cat by Blake Snyder, billed as the last book on screenwriting you'll ever need, which it sort of was. And that doesn't include the advice available online. All of them providing their own way out of the jungle, maps, and more maps. Only problem is these maps are confusing as hell. Each one is kind of the same, but different. Some are linear, some are graphs, some are pyramids, some are circles, until it just becomes a jungle of jungle maps. And that not only makes writing a script bewildering, it sucks the fun and creativity out of it. Which brings us at last to the present. To you, watching me right now, saying, well, I am here to blow all that up. Instead, you need only this. I'll tell you what this is in a minute and how to use it, but first you must clear out of your head all the extraneous information contained within those story act structure techniques and systems. All of it. Gone. Clean slate. It's not that they're wrong. It's just that they're tripping you up. Yes, there is want versus need in a story. Yes, there are allies and mentors and antagonists and stakes and conflict and reversals. But all of this you know. You know this inherently. You know not because you are a writer, but because you are a viewer and a listener and a reader of stories, and have been since before you could speak. They are already in you. And the stuff that's not, I question how useful it is to you. I mean, what even is rising action? Rising how? These terms are too vague to be useful. If you are curious about the minutiae of drama, then study these components, but don't confuse them with structure. They are the ingredients of storytelling. Structure is something else, and it's super simple. Structure is how the character feels, and therefore how the audience feels, and where that happens on a timeline, otherwise known as a journey. A journey is a transformation. That's it. Let's not overcomplicate things. Writing is already hard. Okay. Is your mind clear of everything else? Is it spotless? Because now that you've obliterated the hard way, you're ready for the Bede way. This method of applying and organizing story structure works for an episode of a series or a screenplay for a movie or any kind of story for the screen, big or small. And it starts with a line. For as far back as you can remember, you have been told there is a beginning, a middle, and an end to a story. Well, that's the first big lie. There are really only two parts to a story. A beginning, which you likely already have, or you wouldn't be here, and the most important part, the end. It's alright at this point if you don't have an ending, it only matters that you know you need one. The end, by the way, is the whole point, the reason we're all here. The ending is not where the story finishes, but when it has made its point, where it has earned its reason for being. A story, when all is said and done, is really just a point being made with a flourish, right here. All you have to worry about are these two parts, the beginning and the ending. Everything else that happens in between them is either part of the beginning or part of the end. Now, this could be pages. Say in a 100-page script, this would be the 50-page mark. Or running time in an hour-long TV episode, for instance, this would be the half-hour mark. Or scenes in a 24-scene half-hour comedy, this would be scene 12. Or beats. If you go by Blake Snyder's idea that a screenplay should have 40 beats, then this would make this the 20-beat mark. Whilst on a continuing drama, this would be a hook, which is a cliffhanger. This your pickup, which is the moment you pick up from the previous cliffhanger or hook. And this your mini hook / pickup, so that you know that you've got one mini hook or 20 beats or 12 scenes or 30 minutes or 50 pages to get to here, and then the same again to get to here. And this sets the rhythm that you are working to. I will let you in on a little secret about how I look at story structure, whether that's in a movie or an episode or a season or what. I think of this part as the real story, the story we came for. And the real story starts here. And I look at this part as a pre-story, the part that gets your character to the place where he or she can truly start the real story. This is the appetizer before the main meal, the pre-game, and that goes for whether it's an episode or a movie or a season or what. Before this moment, your character is on the back foot. Here, they're on the front foot. To illustrate the point perfectly, let's use a perfect film, Jaws. This part is about hunting a killer shark in order to stop it terrorizing a tourist town, which is the whole point of the story, the reason it exists at all. This part is just getting Chief Brody to a point where he can get on the boat. The ending, killing the shark, is the point. It is all that matters.
Well, you son of a...
But that story, the part where he's actually doing that, really only starts here.
Front bow, back stern. Don't get it right, Squirt. I throw your ass out the little round window on the side. Come on, Chief. This isn't no Boy Scout picnic. See, you got your rubbers.
Here's another example. Alien. The alien in the titular Alien bursts out of Kane's chest here. This is the real beginning of the story. I mean, the alien is literally beginning. It's being born, and with it, so Ripley's story truly starts. The point of the story is the alien and its threat and stopping that threat, which, like Jaws, is in the title. The alien appears only properly here, and its subsequent threat is eliminated here. Everything before that is just preparing Ripley for what she has to do here. This is the actual story, and this is the actual beginning. Think of this half as like tooling up the character, often literally, but just as easily emotionally, physically, or mentally. Getting him or her to the place they need to be, the person they need to be, in order to be able to properly deal with this half, the real story. Remember always that this line relates to a character's journey, the waypoints on their path to transformation. Not the emergence of the theme, not the order of the action, or plot, or God forbid, information. Structure is a character's emotional path to the ending, which is the actual point of the story. Okay, now I'm going to suggest something radical to you, but I did warn you in the thumbnail. I call this part 1, and I call this part -1. When I was a 24-year-old in Australia, I decided that I wanted to see the world. Thing is, Australia is really far away from the world, and I needed a plane ticket that was going to cost me $3,000. Only problem was, I was about exactly that same amount in debt at the time. So even before I could think about getting my $3,000 plane ticket, I had to clear that same amount in debt. I worked my butt off. I mean, I didn't go out, I barely ate, and after months and months of struggle, for all my back-breaking hard work, I was rewarded with getting to 0. I had no money with which to buy a ticket, but I had no debt, and I was halfway there. You might say the point I had reached was this. And this you might recognize. This is a story dipole. What is the dipole? Well, it is a beginning and an ending all in one. The death of one thing giving birth to another. It is the essential ingredient of drama, where everything changes and nothing is the same. For our purposes, a dipole represents the division between character evolutions. Not acts, not scenes, but evolutions. Your whole story is one big evolution. The handy dipole tool divides that down into smaller evolutions that make up the whole, simply by halving it. Think of this as a gateway from one phase of the character into another. Here I was a man climbing out of debt. Here I was a traveller trying to get on a plane. Those are two different people. Yes, the story started with the inciting incident, deciding to travel, but that really began here. I did get that plane ticket, by the way. Technically, I'm still yet to go home. Here's an example that's more interesting than my plane ticket. In The Matrix, this is the point where Neo re-enters the Matrix, the old world he was living in, having now been made aware of the truth about it, and immediately after he's been trained in how to fight it. He has been tooled up in part -1 and is now beginning the real story, which once again is in the title. This moment here is dead center of the film. It is not a reversal or some big event with some earth-shattering plot twist. It is a facial expression, a moment of change in the lead character as he re-enters the world of the story with fresh eyes. Now tooled up, he has exited the world of confusion and entered the world of confrontation. And we can literally see this structural moment written on his face. They actually make a point of slowing the footage down and pushing in on his expression as this very thought goes through his mind. You won't see this on any structural breakdown of this movie. The midpoint is usually listed as Neo visits the Oracle, which is the next beat. But it's really this. Neo has arrived at the real beginning of his story. Here's the dipole of another classic, Jurassic Park. Yes, this is a big event scene kicking off what Jurassic Park is actually about. Dinosaurs run amok, but it's also the real beginning of our lead character's emotional journey, which is about him coming to terms with having kids. Look at what's at the dead center point of this film. Screaming kids, Alan Grant's expression of concern and realization, and him starting to do something about it. Compare the anxious expression of Grant with that of Malcolm's in this moment, whose look is more of detached fascination. Before this sequence, Grant has been avoiding the kids every which way he can. Following this scene, the whole second half of the movie is Grant saddled with these kids and learning how to look after them, which is the actual point of the story, which is why you care whether dinosaurs run amok. The cleanest way to think about all structure is simply two halves, a beginning and an ending, a part 1 and a part -1, setting up the problem and facing it, the pre-story and the point, tooling up, using those tools, confusion, confrontation. Or to keep it really simple, in honor of a perfect film, let's call this the land and this the water. When all else fails, go back to Jaws.
Martin hates boats. Martin hates water. Martin sits in his car when we go on the ferry to the mainland.
And notice these parts are symmetrical. If you think about it, this makes perfect sense because, as ever, what is true of life is true of stories. The halfway point is the point at which you are as close to the end of achieving your goal as the beginning. One more step and you are now closer to having something than not having it. It is now easier to go forward than it is to go backward. If you are halfway up a mountain, it feels easier to reach the top than retreat to the bottom, emotionally, mentally, if not physically. And if you've ever been on a long-haul flight from Australia, which altogether is 24 hours, you will know that the halfway point matters. And the reverse is also true. Think about the halfway point of a holiday when you start thinking about how many days you have left until you have to go home, or the halfway point of the summer where the days start getting shorter, or the halfway point of your life when you're closer to the grave than birth. It changes the way you think, the way you act. You were one person, free from the constraints of home on a holiday, a person finally getting outside in the spring, a person with hopes and dreams in their youth, and now you're this whole other person who is staring down the barrel of going back to work, or another bit of winter, or your own mortality in the case of a life. And those are journeys where you know what the ending will be, but it works for mysteries too, where the outcome is unknown. Nowhere is this truer than in sports. Think about that moment the players return from half-time. Suddenly it's crunch time, where your team will win or lose. The first half of the game, your team has nothing but opportunities, but in the second half, one by one, those opportunities evaporate. They're like a countdown to victory or defeat. That's the moment you go quiet and start biting your nails. This halfway point is a profound moment in any human endeavor and can't be understated. It is a moment where everything transforms, when your perspective shifts. You, in other words, your character, am now a person who is finishing rather than starting. It is a moment of death of your old perspective, old you, and the birth of your new perspective, new you. You are two different people either side of this watershed. Now, to be clear, a dipole is not a reversal or a midpoint. It is much more useful than that, because now we are going to wield it like a knife. Surely, Bede, you are not saying it's as simple as that. How does that help me with everything in between? Well, the story dipole is endlessly flexible. Once we've divided the beginning and ending into two halves, so we divide again, creating more beginnings and endings, part ones and part minus ones, deaths and rebirths, always two halves, always symmetrical, because every two-parter is itself simply made up of smaller two-parters, smaller units of minus, 0, plus. The two-parter, you'll come to realize, is the Fibonacci spiral of story. Now, you might recognize these as the turning points of Act 1 and Act 2 in traditional story structure. So I've just Miyagi'd you. I've totally Miyagi'd you because look at this. 5 acts, 4 acts, 3 acts, 2 acts, 1 act. Yes, it's all the same, and so no, you have not wasted money on those books about act structure. But now you can understand it all in the simplest, least confusing, least la-di-da way and structure your scripts effortlessly. Because now you can write what you want using nothing but a dipole, knowing you will naturally fall into correct story structure.
Show me wax on, wax off.
It's all just made up of two-parters, two halves all over the place. Watch this. Here is a very cool side effect that has come along with the advent of streaming. You get a literal line at the bottom of the screen, which means you can test this theory with any movie, any episode of TV, even documentaries, which, if they're good, will follow the same format. I do this all the time when I'm watching TV casually. I'm going to choose a bunch of movies currently available to show you what I mean. Let's start with an obvious one, Gladiator. This film is roughly 2 hours, 28 minutes once you take out the credits, which puts its dipole at around 1 hour, 14. And what do we have here? The titular character arriving for the first time at the Colosseum in Rome. And once again, this crucial gateway from his previous evolution to the next is written on his face. We also see the scale of his task in the scale of the building and the intimidation on the face of Maximus. And crucially, we get this line.
Win the crowd.
Which is how Maximus will ultimately succeed, not just as a gladiator, but in freeing Rome and making it a republic, which is the whole point of the movie. Okay, if the primary dipole is 1 hour 14, then that makes the secondary dipole, as I call it, around the 37-minute mark. Let's see what we find. Oh look, a crucial fork in the road for our lead character.
Your emperor asked for your loyalty, Maximus. Take my hand. I only offer it once.
If he takes the hand of Commodus, the movie ends. Rome does not become a republic, Maximus's family lives, and he goes through no transformation. What does he do? Of course. And then the very next beat is Maximus entering the traditional Act 2 of 3, which is often denoted by literally travelling to another place. Now, for the tertiary dipole, as I call it, where you'd find the traditional turn from Act 2 into the final act. In Gladiator, that's around the 1 hour 51 minute mark. Let's see what's there. Aha.
Tell the men their general lives. Find me. Move along! Find me!
So begins the final climax, where Maximus and Cicero, along with Lucilla and Gracchus, formulate their climactic plan that will, one way or another, finish what Maximus started. So there you have it, the traditional turn from Act 1 into 2 and Act 2 into 3. I will say, though, that I think these 2 points in traditional act structure have caused the most damage in terms of everything we see these days feeling kind of samey. I'm not talking about Gladiator because it does it seamlessly, but for a few years now there has been an obsession with making these 2 points super obvious and dumb so that even the cheap seats in the back will get it. Oh, I am leaving the old world I knew and entering the rising action. Oh, I am at the worst point, but wait, there is hope. I'm not talking about writers doing this so much as the suits overseeing them, who can be fixated on leading the audience by the nose. If you, as an audience member, have ever found yourself getting ahead of a story you're watching, or you feel like you understand the story but don't feel it, it's usually because one or both of these 2 turning points are being overclubbed, and that is the moment an audience's surprise and delight dies. So, by all means pay attention to them, but only sort of. I suggest you think of them differently, not as Act 1 and Act 2 turning points, but just as 2 more dipoles, 2 more gateways between evolutionary phases. Just another beginning and ending, another part 1 and part -1. And in that way, they should be treated and act just like the big 2 that you've already done. So let's scroll along and find another one. I saw Hunger Games on here. Here it is. So the credits start here, so that makes Hunger Games about 2 hours and 8 minutes long, which would put the dipole at around 1 hour 4. And look at that, the titular Hunger Games are literally only just beginning. The real story of Katniss and her community's survival, which is in the title and the whole point, is only just beginning right here. Let's have a look at the secondary dipole, which would be around the 32-minute mark. Yeah, Katniss has traveled to... This is just after the train journey from home and entered, literally, the traditional second act. And so begins the tooling up phase, which are the following beats. Let's see what's at the tertiary dipole at around 1 hour 36. Oh look, Rue dying, the good old-fashioned worst point. After this, Katniss enters the final push with renewed abandon, where she will finish what was started and the film will earn its reason for being. Brilliantly, I have to say. Let's try a more obscure one. I saw Escape from Alcatraz on here. The point, once again, in the title. So, the primary dipole would be around here. And, of course, this is where Frank says the key line.
I may have found a way out of here.
And so the real story begins. And this is the crew he'll eventually escape with. Okay, so what about a really obscure one? Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, which you would think would conform to no structure at all. But here at the dipole is the main character, by a nose, Rick Dalton, going through a death and rebirth from one version of himself, the washed-up 50s idol, into the new, kick-ass 60s character actor that he will become. As illustrated most profoundly by new hair. This scene is the gateway from one evolution into another. The next beat is him striding into what will be his comeback, his successful second act in life. This moment is at the secondary dipole, by the way, just after he's been dropped off at the set and just before he gets his new hair. Once again, traveling from one evolution to the next, this time in a car. And this is really interesting. Look what fills the screen at the exact moment of the tertiary dipole. Is there any more of a gateway from one phase to another than that? Tarantino isn't as freeform as you might think. He's a big advocate for sticking to genre, which is itself its own kind of structure. Here's the dipole of Django, for instance. Right smack bang in the middle at the 1 hour 27 minute mark, here is the titular character riding into Candyland, having been tooled up in the first half and arriving at last at his destination, which has been promised in the whole first half of the movie, to find and rescue his wife, which is the actual point of the story and which is only now just beginning. And you can keep going. With the dipole, you can halve again. And again, and again. Halve, 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 giving you beats and scenes and sequences. Forget acts, Think only in moments, and moments grouped together into scenes, and scenes grouped together into sequences. All of them just two-part mini-evolutions with beginnings and endings, separated by the gateway that is the dipole. In real life, all things grow and repair by cell division.
Cell division is important in tissue growth, tissue repair caused by some sort of trauma or disease, and replacement of dying or old cells.
And so it is with the growth of your character and the journey they go through. Now, into these containers you can start throwing all the ideas you have piling up in your head and in your notes. That cool moment goes here, that line of dialogue goes here, those happy tears go here, that sequence that rips your heart out goes here. And you can really play and go crazy because every division after the big ones become less and less critical, meaning less and less required. The beginning, the ending are essential. You'll get into trouble without them, and they're center, like a collapsing cake. The turning points of the old school Act 1 and 2 are really good for orientating the audience, but after that, just be yourself. All you have to worry about is that your moments are compelling, escalating, surprising, and true. And you can go further. Just as the dipole works on the micro, it works on the macro. In a series, for instance, you can divide an entire season this way, and even an entire series. This tool works at whatever scale you are working at. With it, anytime you get lost in ideas, you can come back to these waypoints. I've got to get to this point by this many pages, or beats, or scenes, and if I'm over, I need to cut, I need to be leaner, I need to be more succinct, I need to find a better way of doing it. I think part of what makes traditional story structure methods so confusing is the shapes they contain, which are meant to be helpful but end up being contradictory. Let's take what is, in my opinion, one of the best films of the last 10 years, Uncut Gems. If you are illustrating its story on a graph as rising tension, well, it would go something like this. I mean, it is really tense. It is insanely tense. But if you are representing the fortunes of the lead character, the line would go something like this. I hope that's not a spoiler alert. And if you are going by obstacles and resolution, it's shaped kind of something like this. The truth is, you only need escalation, meaning each moment or beat or scene should build on the last and is never doing the same job of any of the ones that have gone before. Obstacles, confrontation, conflict, change. More and more until there's a catharsis, and with it, the ultimate evolution, transformation, until you've made your point, until the story has earned its reason for being. It's no more complicated than that. So what exactly is wrong with saying a story has a beginning, a middle, and an end? I mean, it sounds logical. Everything that has a beginning and an end technically has a middle, we think. But where does that middle begin and end? It's all middle. We have become so used to the idea of a setup, conflict, resolution, we don't stop to consider the reality, which is it's all setup, it's all conflict, and arguably it's all resolution, because you can't move from one stage to the next without that too. Each plot turn and beat gives birth to the next only by ending. And this goes for all act structures, not just 3. By forcing our stories to rigidly take these stages one at a time, we prevent the story going naturally where it wants to go, and finding a compelling rhythm intuitively. Stories forced into stages force your emotions, and they do it by bending the truth, which not only erodes the audience's suspension of disbelief, it makes our stories collectively all feel samey. In other words, they become less believable and more predictable, which means less engrossing and therefore less successful. We need to stop thinking of setup, conflict, and resolution as separate stages and start accepting them simply as the DNA of story, whose code is embedded in everything and is ever present. If any plot point is only doing one of these things, there's probably something wrong with it. This technique is not a machine for automating the creative process. It is a tool for bringing your script home, usually to deadline, without melting your brain in the process. There is no right or wrong way to approach structure, but there are confusing and simple ways. And this has been a practical tool that has helped guide me through the creative morass day in, day out, whilst never limiting my imagination or different ways to approach telling a story. If you want to write The Thin Red Line or The Mirror or 8½, which is one of my favorite movies, and that is where your soul lies, then do not let this structure stuff get in the way. The world needs people like you as much as it needs people like me. These films have a point being made too, it's just diffused across the entire structure rather than coming at the end. But if you have a very clear desire to tell the most compelling version of your story, where the point comes at the end and lands like a poisoned dart, then this method will make that as easy as pie. A dipole is like a sheepdog for rounding up all the little idea sheeps running around in your head and corralling them into a pen. Use it as much as it helps. There is no right or wrong to this process. Those sheep can be whatever you want them to be. When I was a kid, we got a VHS player for Christmas, and my dad got a deal for 7 videos for 7 days for $7. And so armfuls of movies would come home and we would watch them endlessly. And when we got to the end, we'd start at the beginning and we'd watch them again. And as I did this, I started to see patterns, like seeing the code of the Matrix. All of a sudden, I could see how stories were built, how they did something over here and it paid off over there, and it wouldn't have paid off as well if they hadn't done this first, and how those two things were connected. And now if you dial that up over here, this gets dialed up over there, and that's when it all started.